So this is the final of 3 videos about the control and communication part of the topic, and particularly about the nervous control part of the topic. So the final part is about reflex actions. So if you don't understand about nerve pathways and how they all link together, you really want to watch the previous video to understand the basics of nerve pathways first. So reflex actions are controlled by a reflex arc. So a reflex arc is a pathway of nerves. Okay, and they are particular to reflex actions and to allow your body to respond as a reflex action. So reflex actions, you'll know plenty of examples, you just won't know it yet. Okay, these are unconscious. Okay, so you don't think about them. They are rapid, so they're super fast, and they're involuntary. Right, so they are out with your control. You don't decide to do them, they just happen without your real conscious thought. Okay, and they reduce harm to the body. So some examples of this, to give you some context, are things like blinking. So if you get something in your eye, you blink. Okay, another example would be sneezing. So something, like some dust gets up your nose, for example, you would sneeze. If you brush your teeth too far back into your mouth, sometimes you hit your gag reflex. That's a reflex that means you gag and you try and remove that from whatever it is that's maybe blocking your throat. You have the reflex that controls your iris. So your pupil size in light, so it gets smaller in bright light and wider in dark light, or in dark areas. You have coughing and things as well. So those impulses in a reflex arc, they do not reach the brain. And this is key. So if they reach the brain, what would happen is your brain would then decide what to do with it, and that would take a bit of time. Okay, so if it reaches your brain would have to process it, and it would take too long, and by that point damage would be done. So if you put your hand on something hot, if you think about doing that, and you think about what to do in terms of response to that, it would damage you. So you really have to do this out with conscious control. So these reflex arcs are very similar to normal nerve pathways. Okay, so they would involve a sensory neuron and a motor neuron, but they include another neuron, okay, another nerve cell. And that other neuron is called the interneuron. Okay, now an interneuron, inter just basically means in between. That interneuron is found in the spinal cord. Okay, so none of this reaches your brain, it only goes to your spinal cord, and that's as far as it goes. So I've drawn a diagram to show this, okay, and it might not look perfect, but it will do the job. So this would be a small diagram of an eye. Okay, now the stimulus in this example, the thing that your body would have to respond to, the stimulus would be dust. So if you get dust in your eye, that's a stimulus, your body wants to respond to that. So sensory receptors in your eye will then detect that stimulus. Okay, it'll detect the dust in your eye. And what it'll do then is it'll send an impulse. Those receptors will send an impulse along this neuron here. Then that neuron relates to a sense organ. Okay, your eye is a sense organ, it relates to sensory receptors. And because of that, it's called the sensory neuron. Okay, so far this is exactly the same as a normal nerve pathway. Now the difference comes in the next part. So your sensory neuron, rather than sending that information to your brain to process, what it wants to do is deal with that information really, really quickly. And it does that by sending it to an interneuron. Now that interneuron, its job is to act really, really fast and to just immediately throw that impulse straight down a motor neuron. And that motor neuron is connected directly to it. So that motor neuron is here. And it will immediately send an impulse straight down that motor neuron to then pass it to an effector. Right, and in this example, the effector is the eyelid muscle. So if you get dust in your eye, what your eye does immediately, so before you even think about it, your eyelid immediately then closes. Okay, and it's because the muscle is contracted. So it brings about a response. Your effector brings about a response. And that response is for it to blink, to close. Okay, it causes the eyelid muscle to contract and to close over. So all of this happens in a split second. So stimulus is dust, triggers the sensory receptors to send an impulse from the receptors to the interneuron via the sensory neuron. So it goes sensory neuron first. The impulse then reaches the interneuron, which immediately throws it down the motor neuron straight to an effector. Okay, so in this example, that's the eyelid muscle. Now the eyelid muscle's response then is to then blink. Now this does not involve the brain, it's only in the spinal cord, which I've shown here. Because if it went to the brain, by the time your brain had processed what might be causing that harm, it would then have caused further harm. Okay, so as another example of this, I've drawn on the diagram below, which you might recognise as parts of your homework as well. So this would be a stimulus. Now it's a candle that I've drawn very simply. Okay, and that stimulus is heat from the candle. So if your hand is over the top of a candle or even over a hot stove or touching a hot pan that you've put on the stove, what will happen is the sensory receptors in your hand will detect the stimulus. Okay, that stimulus will be detected and it will send an impulse along a neuron. Now that neuron again is the sensory neuron because it's related to a sensory organ, related to sensory receptors. It will then send that impulse along the interneuron, which is right here. And then that interneuron will pass that impulse down the motor neuron. And that motor neuron will pass it to the effector, which in this case is a muscle in the arm. And what that then does, if you think about it, when you've touched something hot, if you've touched a hot cooker, or you've touched something that's very, very hot or something that's going to cause you pain, you immediately move away from it. Now you don't do this consciously, you don't choose to, you just withdraw from it. And that's exactly what that diagram's shown. That effector, the muscle, has contracted. It's brought about a response. And that response is to move away from the stimulus. Okay? The muscle is contracted and pulled away. So this can be applied to anything. Okay, so in your eyes, in your nose, in your skin, any other sense organ. Okay. Now, just as a summary then, in terms of the order of this pathway, similar to what we did in the previous video, you have a stimulus, which is detected by receptors. And this time, that stimulus is then, once it's picked up by sensory receptors, it doesn't pass this directly to the brain via the sensory neuron, it sends it to the interneuron. So it's sensory neuron first. Then it sends it to the interneuron. And that interneuron immediately passes it to the motor neuron. Now once it's reached that motor neuron passes it down to an effector. And that effector brings about a response, whether that's movement or anything else. Okay, so in short, if you remember it as S, I, M. So that is sensory, neuron, interneuron, motor neuron. In that order, it's always that way. Sensory first, inter next, motor following. Okay, so that gives you a brief summary of the whole of the nervous control part of control and communication.